And I am Tiffany Marley, and I'm the Project Director for the Learning Communities Resource Center, and we are very excited to welcome you to today's first official meeting of Cultivating Data-centric Organizations Learning Community Group Meeting, as well as our national webinar presentation. And as we begin today's discussion, I feel it important to ground the sharing of information through this webinar in the promise of community action. And that promise says, community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And so on this day, being Valentine's Day, happy Valentine's Day, I do think that our conversation is rather appropriate because thinking about the overflow of love and nurture that our agencies pour out on a daily basis to families and individuals to make them feel validated as human beings, to make them feel like they belong to a family of sorts, and to also know that within their possibilities is a possibility whereby they and their families can thrive. And so with that said, as we think about all of that, it's important that we are able to continue to care for and nurture families, and a part of that is to be able to tell those very compelling stories of success or impact, and why it even matters that there should be an investment in the livelihood of all persons within our communities, especially low-income persons and persons who are vulnerable. And a key aspect of that very much centers on this notion of the ways in which the data informs the storytelling process, and even more so, as we will learn through this series, as we think about the whole notion of data and data governance, it cannot be a compartmentalized reality, or we can't approach that from a isolated or siloed point of view, but it really has to do with the overall organization and its way of thinking about how it does business at every level, and how the data conversation plays into that. And so we hope overall that as a result of your participation in this group and in this series, one, you will learn more about the possibilities in this regard, and how your agencies might begin to position yourselves in a particular way that really allows the engagement with the data, the structures of the data, the governance of it to really take on a life that is dynamic, that allows the work to be done more effectively for the organization, so that you might meet the needs of your customers more effectively, but then also in addition to that, you can tell that very compelling story to external stakeholders, to funders, to further resource and sustain the opportunity to continue to do this important work of caring for families and communities on a daily basis. And so with that said, I would like to take a moment to just share the agenda. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the learning community itself, so provide you with a little information about it and engage in a bit of introduction. And then joining us today for our webinar series is a wonderful colleague who is really no stranger to our network, Dr. Barbara Mooney, who heads up our research group, so Association of Nationally Certified Roma Trainers. I can't believe I stuttered on that, Barbara, because I myself am a nationally certified Roma trainer. But really, she has served as what I would say the oracle or our motivator around this whole data-centered conversation for the network. And so it is absolutely fitting that she would help us in thinking about setting the stage or laying that foundation for a data-centered organization. We will then give you all an opportunity for questions and answers, and then talk about what to expect next in our series. And so with that said, to just talk a little bit about the learning community itself, really our purpose or our intent is to build the network's capacity so that all of you as community action agencies and state associations and state CSVG lead offices would be able to fight poverty more effectively. And we do this through the analysis of community action outcomes, and our hope is to, as we identify those outcomes, to also be able to help you pinpoint those promising practices, or really those kinds of activities or strategies that work, that help to advance the impact of those outcomes that really seek to address the causes and conditions of poverty. And so there again, our goal is to build your capacity or help to strengthen your ability to meet the needs of your customers more effectively, and to also be able to track or capture that impact through your engagement with the data in a comprehensive manner so that you can tell that story effectively internally and externally. And so as we think about the notion of the learning community itself, found on the next slide, really we see it as a space and a structure for colleagues to connect around a shared goal. And so for this particular group, we will talk about some shared goals as it relates to that whole data conversation, or cultivating a data-centered organization. And the goal is that you all would gain some insight, information from our subject matter experts, but also hopefully be able to share information amongst yourselves and be able to learn from one another in that process, and then begin to think about maybe some specific goals that you would like to achieve within the context of your organization so that you can make progress within this space. Looking at the next slide, it is the National Community Action Theory of Change, and what I will say about this is it really serves as the backdrop of our conversation today, but really the backdrop of all that we hope to achieve within the context of the learning community, in that as we think about helping the network fight poverty more effectively, this theory of change speaks to our assumptions around the specific goals that we as an entire network share in that process related to individuals and families with low incomes, that they become stable and are able to achieve economic security. That goal number 2, communities where people with low incomes live are healthy and offer economic opportunity. And that goal 3, people with low incomes are engaged and active in building opportunities in communities. And so we have these 3 larger overarching goals, and then the theory of change really sort of speaks to how we seek to achieve those goals, through those services and strategies that we spend a lot of time talking about within the context of the learning community itself, those assumptions or core principles that sort of drive those services and strategies, and then the how of what we do, which I think very much aligns with our conversation today around that cultivation of data-centered organizations. And I want to just say it again, that as we think about the whole way that we should be thinking about data and its structure and how we connect in with it, it really should be a process that is an organizational process that plays itself out at every level of the organization, from the time that a customer first becomes a customer or enters into the doors of the agency, all the way to conversations that play out with the board of directors and other key stakeholders, stakeholders that are internal or external to the agency. And so, looking at our next slide, I want to let you know who your team is. And I am joined today by my wonderful colleague, Hyacinth McKinley. We call her Zandy. She serves as a program associate for LCRC. Also, I would like to acknowledge Courtney Kohler, who is the senior associate for training and technical assistance, and really Courtney plays a key role as it relates to this group in particular, and you will have an opportunity to hear from her more directly through this series, as well as Charles Crocker, who serves as our Director of Training and Technical Assistance, Liza Porras, who is also another program associate on our team, and Charity Frankowski, who is really a gift to us from the national, from the Corporation for National and Community Service. She serves as our VISTA leader and has played a pivotal role in efforts to support our rural impact community of practice. And so without further ado, it is once again my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Barbara Mooney, who is, I would say the guru, and she is going to speak to us today to set the stage for us in thinking about our cultivation of data-centered organizations. Barbara, you are on.
It's a real pleasure to be part of this learning community, and I have a bit of a cold, so I hope I'm coming through clearly, and I hope that I'll be able to keep you entertained as we go forward. This is a learning community. It isn't about an expert talking to a group. It is about a group coming together to share their own experiences. But we thought today, in the first session, we would set out some basic principles and practices so that we have some foundational work to base our work on. We're going to start with these objectives that we've identified as part of this learning community. We came up with what we're calling 3 elements of a data-centered organization that include data management processes, database decision-making, and communication related to data. Now, as we'll talk throughout the learning community experience, there are lots of other data points or places where data is important, but we're going to focus on these 3 as a way to frame our discussions. And we know that the role of organizational culture is so important as we move to a data-centric system or approach. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but that'll just be a beginning to what we talked about. We sent out ahead of time a little assessment, an organizational assessment. We'll talk briefly about that, but we'll hope that you'll be able to use that after today's webinar to help you to look at different aspects of your organizational culture. And then we're going to look at current data processes, and this, as I say, this is a start, and this would be an ongoing part of our discussion as we go forward, thinking about those purposes for data collection and then how it's actually done. So we'll start that today, but that's going to be the backbone of what we think about going forward. Just to clarify, we make the distinction between data and information in some of the other training materials that are posted. I just took a couple of things off Wikipedia and off some other definitions on the web. It's about facts, statistics, characters, symbols, things that get assembled, a sequence of symbols, but it's all about interpretation, and Wikipedia agrees with us, and we all think that in order for data to become information, it has to be analyzed, translated, there have to be known factors considered. So what, when we talk about data, we're assuming some things. We're assuming that we have good data quality. And when we talk about data quality, we are primarily talking about these four areas, that the data is complete, accurate, timely, and reliable. And we can define those more clearly, but if you do not have data that has these qualities, then you're subject to misinformation or making decisions based on flawed flawed data. So we thought we would set up some core values, and I got a message to move something. I don't think I can move it. At any rate, some core values that characterize this kind of an organization. And so this could be a little checklist for you to think about. The data-centric approach really values decisions that are supported by verifiable data. This doesn't mean that you're making decisions in a cold, disheartened way, but that you're using facts as a part of your decision-making, and that they're verifiable data. And again, that it's accurate, reliable, timely, and complete. And that there's a system that monitors data entry and provides follow-up. This system is something that's very important, and we're going to talk more about it today. And that the system includes storage, retrieval, aggregation of the data, as well as just data collection. And that all of this relies on the effectiveness of analysis and interpretation of the data. Data is just a tool. You have to be able to interpret it. And this last one I think is important. None of this will make a difference if it isn't put to use, and put to use specifically to improve agency actions and produce results for families and communities. In the introduction that Tiffany gave, she stresses this part, that this is not an abstract academic study, but it is about improving value, improving services, and improving outcomes. So today we're going to look at three core functions that support our values, and one is the management of data collection, analysis, and follow-up, and the second is that we're talking about data decision-making based on data. And you could find a lot of different terms for this concept. It could be data-driven or fact-driven decision-making. You might find something called DM, data-driven decision-making, if you search the web. Or it's information-based or information-informed decision-making. And you'll even find a discussion about evidence-based or evidence-informed decision-making. And I know that's important to us as we think about the selection of services and strategies, that they be based on evidence. And so we'll think about how decisions are made and what we even mean by decision-making. And then the final piece of this is about communication. How do you communicate the data, the analysis, the actions, and so on? And how is this all then contextualized in an organizational culture that fosters the use of data, embraces data, and those various functions? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And you have or will have this PowerPoint. I might be looking at data management, or I might be skipping some things as we go along. So, but you'll have all of it as you go forward. Okay, so in terms of the quantity of information that we have, we can't just wing it when we talk about managing it. We really have to have a system, or else we become overwhelmed. And I think that's what happens to some of us when we think about this data system, is that we think about something that becomes overwhelming to us. You need to understand that not all the data elements that you have at your disposal are going to help you. They're not going to necessarily lead to improvement or help your understanding. Sometimes you have too much data, and you could be led in a direction that you don't want to go. It's really important for us to know that the data doesn't drive us. We have to take control of it, and we have to add our own insights and our personal reflections and create a way to actually manage all of this data. And we suggest, and we're not alone, that there be written policies and procedures, and that it be clear what each staff position is supposed to do. And more importantly, what's the purpose for each of those things? What's behind those things? One of the key elements of this is a system. Of this system is a leader, a manager, a coordinator, somebody who's responsible really for making sure that the data is being entered. Remember, the completeness of data is one of the most important things, and it isn't always complete unless there's some follow-up to help that out. That there's some opportunity for how this is aggregated, how it's shared, making sure that everybody gets a chance to look at it, and so on. And that if there's missing data, how do we secure it? Now, this first bullet on this page that says the agency system must be agency-wide. I think there's some caveat there to say that the goal is to have an agency-wide system, but it isn't necessarily true that you will start out with an agency-wide system. You may start out with a system in a small section of the agency to get a sense of how this should work. So the goal at the end would be that it would be something agency-wide, and that's so that all of the stakeholders can implement the system, can be a part of it, and that they have a collective responsibility for it, and that they get feedback from the system. They can use the information themselves, and that they understand their part, and that they know what the relationship is. I'm probably sounding like I'm beating on the same topics, but it's important for us to really have an understanding that we must know what the data can do. It's not enough to just collect the data. You have to say, how is this going to help me? What matters to me? And you can look at your mission statement, your needs assessment, your strategic plan to figure out what are the questions that you want to know. Instead of thinking, what data can we collect? Really start by saying, what is it that we want to know? That's really important. And then once you know what you want to know, then you can think about what data you need to answer those questions and why it's important for you to have that information. and then to be thinking ahead to say, if you find out something, how are you going to put it into action? How are you going to use that data? And that comes to the point of decision making. I thought it was funny. I got this from a quote from an article about the Ford Motor Company, and they said that they have been using data to inform decision making, management, and governance since 1913, and that this whole concept of data-driven decision making led the company to perfect the vehicle assembly line. So that's kind of interesting that this whole concept is not only not new, it's 100 years and more old, but that they further said that they did not raise this to a level of importance until they hired a chief information officer, and that just happened within the last decade. And so what did that chief decision-making officer mean to them? It meant someone that could actually manage the flow of information. So we're supported by some important business validation. And this means that we're going to use the data not in place of intuition, personal experience, and so on, but that we use it in addition to those things, that we are still going to use our intuition, our gut feeling, our opinions, but we're not going to use that alone. So what we see in this quote is that without data, you just have opinions. But with the data, you're elevating the chances that you're going to make a right decision. And this is just a little, not just the problem and the solution, but this whole concept of using data analysis, which includes the whole process of collecting the data, storing the data, retrieving the data, aggregating the data, and making sure that the right people see it and respond to it, and so on. It's all part of that data analysis. But before you have a solution, that you really consider all of the elements of the decision, and then that you take action. But at the process of at the center of the entire data process is the decision-making piece. Or you just rely on what we've always done. And here's another piece, that it's not based on a single incident. I think that's one of the things that's important to think about. When you're talking about data, you're not just thinking about one thing. So I'm not making decisions for an entire program based on one family's experience or based on one incident, but rather that I'm looking at patterns, practices, relationships, I'm looking at strengths, I'm looking at challenges, and I'm doing it in a way that helps to create staff competence so that it's not just about someone at the top doing this analysis, but that it's about everyone doing part of that. I'm hoping this is making sense, and that if there are something, or that there's something involved here, if there are questions, make sure you can type them in the chat window so that Tiffany and Zandy can pick up on them. Okay, moving on here. How do you get ready for decision making? This is a hard one here, making sure that staff has access to the data. It's not always the case that frontline staff has access to the data. They are charged with entering the data, but they aren't necessarily given access to reporting of the data. So that's important, but not just that they have access, but that they also understand that they have professional development, so that they know what is expected of the data analysis tools that they've been given access to. And then that they have time. Oh, wow, isn't that a biggie? Build time for data-related tasks. And then here's one, this fourth bullet. I don't think we pay enough attention to this concept that you're structuring conversations about data, that you're including data discussions in staff meetings, in interactions among staff. You're encouraging data discussions in informal conversations in staff. That there's really, that becomes a part of the discussion, a part of the conversation. And then that we understand the priorities, what do we have to do first, and that we have some ideas about what we do first. So we don't make any decision until we compile it, and we display it, we analyze it, and we discuss it. Okay. There's a little chart here, a little circular motion that shows that we gather different types of data, we turn them into information, we create this actionable knowledge, and then we make decisions. And then we communicate those decisions. We communicate information. It used to be that you had to have a background in technology to mine data, and data mining is one of those terms that is used in these kinds of discussions. But now everybody has this smartphone in their hand, this very powerful data machine, and there are all kind of software products out there, dashboards of all kinds. So it's important to know, and this is one of the questions that you'll be looking at going forward, is who gets to see the information that comes out of the data, and how is that communicated? We don't have time today for a discussion on this, but this definitely will be the source of one of our discussions coming forward, to really think about who sees it and what is it that they see. One of the documents that's available to you online is something that I did with NASCAS. It's a little assessment of your reporting system. This is one kind of communication. It's those reports that get generated. Sometimes reports just get spit out as raw data. Some things like a financial report, or logs of attendance, or monthly reports of service utilization, or lists of customers. But if that's the case, if that's all you're getting, I mean, that's useful information, that's useful data, but it doesn't get turned into very much information. So the assessment document helps you to think about how the reports are, how they're displayed. What's the quality of the data? Is it accurate, complete, timely, and reliable? How is it easy for the reader to understand this document that they have? How useful or relevant is the data? Am I, as a program manager, getting information that isn't useful? And so after I look at it a couple of months, I stop looking at it, rather than I say, or I feel I have the right to say, I would like to have different data. So it's important to consider that. And then, does the data include outcome information or outcome performance, or is it just about outputs? And how can you compare the outputs and the outcomes? So those are important pieces to think about. But, you know, the communication has to go well beyond reports. It's not just about reporting. It's about what gets included in newsletters or brochures or the agency website. And these are a couple things I mentioned before. Part of staff meetings. Is there informal conversation that is encouraged to have data included? And then what about the board? What's expected for the board to hear, to talk about? What role do they have in then communicating the information out into the public? And this is just a little graphic to show that all of these pieces really have to be inside this results orientation, inside the big circle of what outcomes do we produce in order to be a data-centered organization. Okay, so I'm going to take a breath there and take a little sip of tea. And then start to talk a little bit about organizational culture. This is the beginning of a much larger discussion, but I wanted to have a key points here for you to start to think about that if you are currently not a data-centered organization, you are going to have to change something. And if you are a data-centered organization, but you want to improve your focus, you're still going to have to change some things. And it isn't something that can be mandated. There can't be a directive that says, we want you to change your culture. No, the leadership of the organization must persuade the cultural change. And it's all about this last bullet, constructing and internalizing an alternate belief system that produces a new set of behaviors. And that is hard. There can be some key people in the agency that want to move this way, but it can be very difficult to bring the whole group of employees forward. Here's a message from a business guru who says that trying to implement new behaviors and measurements without addressing underlying culture is counterproductive. He also says that this has to be done collectively and that it has to begin with a shared language. So that's why we started today with some shared language so we can talk about being data-centric in a reasonable way. Some things that the leadership can do is create a climate that fosters excellence, that insists on and models data use, that the leader actually talks about data, makes data-based decisions, and that there's an acknowledgement of success. You know what we say, if you're not rewarding success, you're probably rewarding failure. So there has to be a way to think about success. And, you know, this really requires that the leader have some data savvy, some sense of what this might be like moving forward. So, so they can influence this cultural change. Some things to be explicit about, to articulate, to be clear about are how data influences decision making, about who the stakeholders are and how they each should engage in the data, and that there are measurable outcomes that are a part of this whole data system. And again, that this communication be built into the system. That we create a specific position for someone who's going to be managing all of this, someone that's going to be shepherding this all forward. The second bullet is a key one where I've talked to many organizations that have gone through this change, and one of the key pieces is that staff job descriptions are actually changed to write in roles related to data collection, storage, retrieval, analysis, and so on, so that each person knows what they're specifically responsible for, and then that they be evaluated based on that. It says here, provide recognition of work well done, but it also means that if staff is not engaging in work well done, if that's not part of the system, that we can say, here's what we need to do to improve. You haven't finished your data entry in a timely way. Your data is not accurate, and that there be some consequences there too. This is just a graphic for those folks who like to look at things in a little different way. The idea that leadership really is an influence. It's not a mandate, and that you're looking at culture change, you're looking at job duties, you're talking about communication, and that there be a person who's responsible. And then if you have a leadership team, actually, maybe not a single person, but maybe a person who's responsible and has a team of folks that we understand the expectations about the process, we know what data sources we're going to utilize, and we could identify the decisions to be made. One of the things in the research I did for this that comes up again and again is that decisions should be made every day, and that every decision should have some element of data connected to it in some way. And then once the decision is made, that there be action. So why does this not just happen automatically? I'm going to get these all up here. It looks like they might be coming one at a time. But these were some challenges I found, and guess what? I thought all of these challenges were things that we have talked to folks about, that in the process of looking at this information, we've heard these kinds of things from a lot of different organizations. Time. We don't have the time. We don't understand the significance of the data analysis, and we're just going to report on it. We don't understand how we can use it to improve. We don't understand that we're going to look at the big picture. Why do I care about other people's customers? I just want to focus on my own customers. I don't see the big picture. I don't know what changes need to be made, or when changes can be made, or how they can be made. And I don't understand why some things are required. Why is this particular element, data element, required? I don't understand. And if I don't understand it, then it makes it less of a priority for me to make sure that that's included. And then this whole idea about benchmarks. How are benchmarks set? How are they applied? How do they help you in a data-centered culture? How do we know that the data that we're collecting is the right data? Is it the data that really is a reliable indicator of performance, or are we just collecting things and not connecting them to our performance? And I think finally on this page that it's really something that we hear a lot, that staff does not feel confident in their skills. They don't know if they're asking the right questions. They don't know if they're looking at the right set of data, that they're pulling the data together in the right way. And so that all that says is we need to have some additional training available if we identify those problems. But these are the kinds of things that you'll have to be identifying. You'll have to be finding out what are the challenges. They may not be, these challenges may not be the challenges for your staff. In part of your assessment of your own current utilization of data, you'll be looking at who does what and how do they do it. This is just a little questionnaire that you'll have that was I found and have adapted for us. But you know, are staff comfortable? And so this is something that you could ask your management staff to address. How do they feel the staff that they supervise will relate to data and data decision making in the agency? But remember that it's not just about a new mindset or a new attitude. It's also about new skills, and we can't gloss over that. We have to make sure that we understand that we have to change attitudes, but we also need to change knowledge, and we also need to change skills. So if we're looking at these different pieces of the process that we're talking about to be data-centric, you know, collecting, storing, retrieving, analyzing, using, putting into action, communicating, really to be thinking about which areas could use new skill sets, which new skill sets are involved. So the charge to you will be really to think about your current data processes. Where is the data? Who collects it? What happens? What's the importance of data? If data is not important now, how can it be elevated in importance? Where did the data come from? Is the data representative of the agencies that you want? One of the documents that was posted is called a Guide to Creating Policy, and it's just a few questions, and it starts with just these two people in your agency, and it asks you then to think about others in your agency that do data collection, because data is everywhere in your agency. But what data does the receptionist collect? And if we were in person, I would ask you to say what data the receptionist collects. But I'm hoping you're thinking about the people that are in the front of your office physically. They know who's there. They know the names of the people usually. They know a little bit about the people that are there. They know if they've brought children with them or not. They know if they're in a hurry. You know, they know a lot of things. They know who the person who's coming in has come to see. They know if that person gets served or gets seen. And they know if they were there yesterday as well as today. So there's a lot of things that the receptionist knows. Are you capturing that data? Are you making sure that that data is part of some analysis somewhere? If it's important, if you think it's important. But you have to know what it is before you say, oh, it's not important. You have to understand it. You have to bring it into your system to be able to understand it. And then, of course, what does the case manager know? They're doing intake. They're doing assessment. They're doing all kinds of, they're gathering all kinds of data. So you need to be thinking about that data. And is it output, process, or outcome data? I mean, there's all kinds of data, but you don't want to lump it together without understanding that these things track different kinds of, produce different kinds of information in their tracking. So those are things that we'll ask you to think about in your data collection. Oh, this is a flow chart which you can't see. It's just an idea that you need to start to think about how the data flows. The data gets collected, and then who does it go to? And in this case, it goes both to the left and to the right, and then how does it loop back around? So this is just a sample flow chart here for you to consider. And in the data collection, the data analysis module, we have some examples of flow charts too. Before I leave this section, I want to make sure that I talk about the difference between aggregation and integration. Agencies need to do both of these things, but at what level is the question. Aggregating data just means you're bringing together things that you've created buckets for. And when I first started hearing that we're going to have buckets for data, I thought, well, that's kind of a weird terminology. But then I find out that that's really a technical term for the collection, the aggregation of data, that you create, you say, here's a bucket, and it might be age groups, or here it might be language, primary language that's spoken, or here it might be geographical information. What neighborhood did people come from? So aggregating data is one thing, but integrating it is where the real problems start to happen. And sometimes it's integrating data from different systems. Sometimes this is the basic challenge. Oh, I have a lot of data that is in different systems, and how do I pull it together? But even in addition to that, integrating data that's different elements, so services and outcomes. how do you integrate that information? Sometimes it's not, or how do you integrate that data so it becomes information? Sometimes that's not easy to figure. You have a list of the services that are provided and a list of the outcomes, but you don't have a way to integrate those pieces. So we'll be talking about aggregation and integration as we go forward. What I thought I would do, just as an example, this is of an agency that is going through the process of becoming more data-centric. And it's just one example of many that are out there, but this one is, has just recently had a published review, and I thought that was important. This is an agency in Colorado, and in Colorado, they don't have community action agencies the way some other states, the way most of the other states do. But BAYOD is an organization that receives CSBG funds, even though it's not technically a community action. But they had, and I checked my facts after I submitted these, and it was more like 20 independent data systems in place, including some Excel spreadsheets and Access databases. But these were being maintained by staff in their own program area. But the agency wanted to have a unified system, and so they contracted to get a software, agency-wide software system. And you know what? So surprising. The staff resisted, and this is so true in many organizations. You know, for all those reasons that we've already talked about. But the agency didn't let up. They hired they identified a data manager. The data manager worked with the software company. They created diagnostic reportings. They started to think about what works. And one of the things they found was that there was missing or incomplete data. And so, so they had to go back through and help to take some action to make sure their data was clearer. And so one of the things that we talked about was made sure there's the skill levels of the people who were saying, oh, this is the last thing I'm going to do on my list, that maybe it was because they didn't have skills. So there was a formal in-house training program established to make sure that they understood this new system and what was expected of them. And the exec attended those training sessions, really saying, these are important to me. They changed the job descriptions, as we talked about before. This is one of the hallmarks of a change towards being agency or being data-centric. And they developed some training aids to support the staff as they started to move forward. They recognized that staff just wasn't going to just suddenly change things. They needed more skills, they needed more knowledge, and they needed more support. So what happened? I don't know if I can get it to go forward. Any new staff that came in was oriented to this new valued data system. And I had this error. It wasn't a marketing and planning director, but a chief information officer who was hired. I had the title wrong here. But they hired another person. So they have a data manager and a second person who are both working together to develop things like the agency theory of change. They created some ideas. They shared it with staff so they could get people to start to think about why data, why, what's the purpose of all of that. They're going to start looking at social return on investment next. And then the person who was doing the data collection and managing the data was recognized by the employees and voted by our peers as Employee of the Year and honored at a luncheon, not a formal dinner. That was an error. But one of their programs, and this is sort of the last piece of this, but one of the programs that's based on data was recently reviewed and evaluated by a university evaluation system, a rigorous system, and the report was published, and as a result, the agency got 2 more years of funding that adds to their value. So they were successful in getting some additional funding to support them. So that was a reward for them. And having a reward for being data-centric is always part of maintaining the data centricity as we go forward. In the future, we want more examples like this. Thanks to Bayard in Colorado for allowing us to use them as this in this first webinar. It's important for us to have peers speaking up, saying, oh, these were the challenges we went through as others are trying to move forward. So we're going to hope to have some more examples and maybe some more interaction with Bayard's staff as to how they move forward and what their challenges remain still, what challenges are still there. And then that you all are exploring your own agency processes. What's your agency organizational culture? What's your data processing systems right now? And then we'll have some ways to help you compare your processes so that you can think about, well, what piece of this are we going to take some action on? What's going to be the action that we take? I'm going to turn the presenter role back over to Tiffany, who is going to help us if there are any questions or chats, or Zandy maybe, any questions or chats that we want, and then to follow up with any follow-up.
All right. Thank you very much, Barbara. And so what questions do folks have about what has been shared so far? Or let me say it this way, what are folks interested in learning a little bit more of that Barbara has already touched on in the presentation today?
I would also be curious if anybody did any of the assessment pieces, if they started to look at their own agency culture or processes at all, if that raised any questions for them. I didn't expect that they would have much time before this to do it, but someone might have.
All right, so we're scanning away, and here's one from Erin Wicks. How do we find resources, time, and funding in particular to pursue some of these ideas? What advice would you offer, Barbara?
Well, that's sort of the big question. and Erin, you aren't asking me, you're asking your peers, right? Yes, of course, because it's a learning community. And that's really the kind of discussion that we have to have. We need to find answers to that. So that's a kind of question that we would need to post and get responses from folks. What resources have they found? What's been useful? What have they tried that has not been useful? I think those are all things that that we would want to explore to answer that question.
That's good. So as a group, we can add that question to our learning agenda to find the answer to that, as you said, amongst peers and just within the field. And yes, I won't even start to respond to it because, you know, we'll pique your curiosity and build some suspense as we seek to just add some more content to support the response to that question. So here's another question from Micah Varela. He's basically asking if we could discuss data management software that is the most user-friendly and provides an efficient way to create reports. I wonder what Barbara will say to this one.
Well, you know, we can certainly, I think that's a fair question, and it is definitely part of what we'll be exploring as you analyze your data processes. But software is only one of the pieces of the whole process. You have to know what data you want to put into a software system, how you're going to get it, who's going to collect it. And then when you're talking about user friendliness, Part of that is an assessment of your own staff. What would be, what levels of skills are they on currently? So there are a lot of things that you need to identify. And then you can hear from each other software packages that you use that are useful, that produce the kind of outcomes that you want. But we will certainly not be suggesting one kind of software over another, because there are different purposes for the different software packages and different utilizations for them. So, but that's only a part of, the software is only a part of the process. Now, it's an important part. It's a, if your tool's not there, then it doesn't, you know, then you don't get the right outcome. So you need to have it, but that's only a part of it.
Yeah, and the way I like to frame that is it's all about the foundation, right, or the framework, so to speak. And so if you don't have a clear understanding of what your data plan is and what your data governance process will be, what data standards will exist so that you can communicate across multiple platforms internally or, you know, with external stakeholders. If all those structural or foundational or framework pieces are not in place, you can have the most extravagant, most expensive database there is out there, and it really will not serve you. It's literally like, you know, building a $1 million mansion on a sinkhole, so to speak.
Right.
And really, it's the intent of our conversation and our learning in this process is to make sure that we have thoroughly, you know, thought about the architecture of our data and those processes that support that architecture that help us to do our work more effectively, as we've already said, and allows us to tell a very effective story also. And so, yes, we will, and it's likely going to play out in our affinity group conversations, which we'll say a little bit more about later, give peers an opportunity to share about what their experience has been with different databases or platforms. And then, you know, still it's going to be up to your individual agency to make the right decision for you based on your location. So we'll certainly add that to our learning agenda as well. And I want to also affirm that, you know, that question is a question that really our entire network is asking, and, you know, I would venture to say the entire human services field, especially as we're thinking about how to engage in innovative program delivery or, you know, engage in those best practices. The question of data and how to structure that and how to get it to do all the things that we would like it to do comes up every time. All right, and so we have another question, Barbara, from Marcus Crawford. And he says, could you touch on the differences between data aggregation and data integration one more time? And so, Barbara, if you could speak to that, and then
Sure.
Maybe Marcus's question maybe means that we need to just sort of call out that particular segment of your conversation and think about how we might, you know, share that specific piece with the larger group so they can all get it.
So I could aggregate age data from multiple databases that I have in my agency. In the Bayode example that we talked about from Colorado, if they had 20 different systems, which is not, you know, it's not totally typical, but it's not uncommon that that agencies have, you know, 10 or more data systems. So I could aggregate the data from all of those different databases to say how many people of a certain age group appeared for each of those programs. But in order to integrate that information, I would have to bring the information from those various programs together. So that's one example of the difference between aggregation and integration. So I don't know if that's a useful example for Martin.
That's helpful, and as I said, we'll put that on our list as well to sort of think about how we might elaborate on that in a more meaningful way to advance our conversation. And I think that question is very loaded and definitely resonates there again with some of the conversations around innovative strategies for meeting the needs of our customers. And, well, I won't even elaborate. I'll just stop there. So I think we will put it on our list to spend a little more time talking about it and thinking about it. So thank you. So we now have a question from Evelyn Kinnikin. Hopefully I said that.
Before you go on to that, just one final thing about that is that as you're looking at your own data systems, you should be thinking about those two issues. How well can you bring data together that's similar? How easy is that? And then can you integrate both across databases and also between data elements? So can you say how many people of a certain age got a certain service, for example? So that's another example of integration. So, so you should be thinking about that as you're doing your analysis. So, yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Tiffany.
No, and I'll make a little plug and say that as a part of the partnership Community Action Economic Mobility Initiative, we have identified some agencies who are part of our whole family community of practice. They are just getting started up this month as well, but a part of their work is going to be to sort of take a deep dive into just what we're talking about, around that whole notion of data integration in particular. And really, they're going to be able to receive some hands-on technical assistance in that space to learn so that they can strengthen the way that they engage in the data integration process on the program or agency level, but there will also be an opportunity for the rest of us, so the larger network, to hear about the lessons that they learned in the process. And so, I say that to state that within the context of what's going on with this group right now, we're going to definitely put that question back on the table for us to explore. And then in addition to that, we want to, build some suspense for you yet again to be on the lookout in the months to come to see how this process of thinking more deeply about the implementation of data integration plays out for the community of practice agency. So there will be some more information about that is what I want to say. So there's another question, Barbara, from Evelyn Kinnick. And Evelyn's question is, how do you motivate your staff to move towards data-centric? I had a meeting last week on the importance of entering all of our services into our database, and one of them found every excuse in the box to not start entering the data. So the way I perceive that question is, how do you build or motivate the will of colleagues and the agency itself to become more data-centric?
So I think you have to make it useful.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's nobody, you come to a meeting and you say, oh, guess what, we're going to start entering data, and everybody's not going to jump up and down and say, yay, whoopee, great things, we want to enter data. It has to be clear what the purpose is of the data and how it will be useful. And so that's really the best motivator, is to be able to figure out. And part of that is to do that exploration as a group, that the leadership has some knowledge of why they want to do this. but they stimulate the discussion among the staff to develop that. But again, this is not my idea. This would be, let's ask the people who have done this work, right? Let's ask the folks who have started, that have seen some movement forward. So I think that's a good way.
All right. So another question, Barbara. This is coming from Brian Snelling, and he's asking, will data security be discussed in future webinars? Yeah.
I think the idea of the ethical implications of data collection, analysis, and decision-making is always a part of the discussion. You know, we must recognize people's rights. The question comes up, who owns the data, whose data is it? And you know, it really is the client's data, the person who it's about, it's their data, but there are differing understanding of what that means in general. So yes, the discussion about ethics and confidentiality, which I think is a major part of ethics, but it's only part of it. There's a larger piece, not only that you keep the data confidential, but that you also use it in a reasonable, responsible, and ethical way. So yes, those are both pieces of the discussion about creating a policy or a system. A good question. These are all great questions. And what we would want to hear from peers, from the members of the group, is what ethical questions, what confidentiality barriers, what are the things that they have heard, and what might they suggest going forward.
All right, and so, yeah, so we'll add that one, and there's some lovely resources around, like, what some of the laws are. So we do think it's important for you all to understand, you know, what the laws do actually say, because I think that's where some of our agencies have experienced barriers in that space, especially in those data share agreements, whether it's internal to the agency, within agency programs, or whether it's external with external partners. And so it's absolutely relevant, and there are wonderful resources out there to support that. So this next question, and it's coming from, I can't see who that is from, but it says, okay, Sharon DeBose. It says, many of our programs have required databases. We currently use 6 different databases for programs across the agency. Have others come up with solutions for integrating data into one system while still using all required other databases? So,
and the answer to that is yes, of course. There are many ways to do it. The agency that we highlighted today, Bayard in Colorado, has worked on that challenge, as have a number of other agencies across the country. It's part of what you need to consider going forward, and what we need to hear from the members about how they have done that, how they have solved it.
Sure. Sure. Very good. And so there are lots of questions here today. They include recommendations for any free data programs, which I think we can put on our list to talk about in our peer affinity group space, or in the Moodle context. Let's see, what other questions were there? Just want to make sure we captured everything that everyone has put out. There is a question about the job descriptions. That's it. Or please state those 2 job positions that may be needed for data collecting and data management.
So the one position that's absolutely essential is somebody who's going to pull this all together, like a central contact, however you call that person. But there's two pieces. One is to have a central person, but the other is to assure that data collection is part of the job duties of everyone, because you don't want to have one person be responsible for all the data. That doesn't work in an agency. That one person is responsible for making sure the data is flowing and is being entered and so on. But data collection and entry has to be part of everyone's job in order for it to be complete and accurate and timely. So it's a key position, however you call it, and then key job duties for every person.
Yeah. So I think that is very well said. At the end of the day, the data management process truly is everybody, every organization's responsibility, and we'll continue talking about that during the course of our series. Barbara, there aren't any additional questions. Is there a final word that you would like to offer as we prepare to offer final announcements?
That you look at the information in the Moodle site, you look at those assessments, you look at some ideas. I did a little key points document from from some of the things that we talked about here, which could be like checklists for you to think about. But be thinking about, I mean, if you're interested in this learning community, it must be because you want to improve your data focus or your data decision making, data-driven decision making. So be thinking about how you're going to assess your agency and what kinds of information you need to know. So this is start out the data group by asking for data.
Excellent. So thank you once again for your leadership today, and I want to just quickly call a few things just for you to pay attention to. One is the learning community does have a blog, and we'd like to invite you to sign up as a follower on that blog to just get real-time updates on new resources and information that we share in that space. And that URL is www.lcrcweb.com. So that is a resource that you can use and also share with any of the folks in your agency or partners. In addition to that, our archive or resource hub for all of our training and technical assistance resources is the CSBG TTA Resource Center, where we have an opportunity for folks to make training or technical assistance requests, where you can access our resources and our consultant bank. So that is available to you. Today you are already participants or are already participants in what we call Webinar Wednesdays. And so you can count on the partnership to have some webinar related to innovative or promising practices every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And so you just want to mark your calendar. For every Wednesday at 2, we'll have some good information to share with you. And our group in our series is a part of that, and I'll tell a little bit more about our upcoming date. Barbara has mentioned on several occasions our Moodle site, which we call Community Action Academy. That is a wonderful space where you can go a little deeper and engage in some exercises. That's where we will house the slides and just other information for official members of this learning community group. You also have the ability to engage in discussion and dialogue with one another in that space. And so maybe there are some questions that came up today that you're really wanting to know the answers to those right now. I want to hear from peers about those. You can totally use that space, the discussion board, to engage in that conversation with peers. And if you have any questions about how that system works, you can reach out to us at the partnership and we will provide you with direction. Our colleague, Courtney Kohler, she is the Dean of Community Action Academy, so she is available to answer any of your questions and to kind of help you navigate that system as you need to. Here's the meeting schedule for our series, and so today was our first presentation, and so the next presentation is scheduled for February 28th, so mark your calendars. And otherwise, you see that our schedule is pretty spread out. And Dandy, tell me the name of the February 28th presentation again. I'll talk about it while we get the exact title for folks, but that particular session is really targeting the entire learning community. And I think we're talking about collecting and analyzing community-level data from a health sector point of view. So in essence, we're thinking about the data on the community level, sort of using the context of health intersections and social determinants of health as the context for that. And so here's the exact title. I appreciate that. Gathering community data on the social determinants of health and poverty. And we will be receiving that presentation from Community Commons and the County Health Rankings and Roadmap. So that promises to be a really interesting conversation, like I said, to kind of put our thinking about that community level data and how to analyze that within context. And some of the topics or themes that maybe come up in this discussion, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to loop back on with you all to elaborate a little bit more to meet your specific needs as members of this group. And so then the final thing is we need your feedback, and we realize that we've just now gone through our first presentation, and so right now we would ask that you go ahead and complete our baseline survey. Ideally, the baseline survey would happen before you got any teaching or exposure to the information or knowledge, but we are still early in our learning process. And we really need your feedback to kind of help us to understand where your starting point is in terms of your learning and exploration and implementation, so that we can also begin to tell the story of the impact of our efforts to build your capacity to do what you're doing on the agency level. And so finally, we want to thank Dr. Barbara Mooney again for her time. Her efforts related to the learning community have been tireless. We really could not do this work without her, so really appreciate her serving as a subject matter expert for us today and holding us accountable, particularly as it relates to this conversation. And on the screen, you see the contact information for the Learning Community Resource Center team, and so feel free to contact any of us if you have any questions or needs, and we look forward to seeing all of you on February 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We thank you today. Continue to spread love to those wonderful families and communities that you serve. Make it a great day. This concludes our webinar.